Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kittle. I'm a branch chief in the divisions of grants and agreements. I'm supporting size, engineering, OIA, and TIP directorates at NSF.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rochelle Ray. I'm the branch chief for resolution and advanced monitoring. And our division is the Division of Institution and Award Support. Pleasure to see you or have you all here today.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and kick things off. We'll go ahead and start with a overview of the Division of Grants and Agreements, who we are, what we do and why, and what our objectives are for today. Go ahead and start with the fact of who we are. So again, my name is Daniel McEnroe, Grants Management Specialist here at the Foundation. Our role sort of picks up after the merit review side of things at the Foundation is completed. So you're familiar with your EPSCoR program officers. You're most likely familiar with the merit review side of things, the panel review systems in place in NSF, and how our NSF program officers work together to ensure that proposals that are submitted get reviewed and get recommended for award. Once that takes place, those proposals then come down to us and are set up for our financial administrative reviews. So here in the Division of Grants and Agreements, that's where our process begins. We take a look at the proposals from pre-award. So we look at the proposal. We then award said proposals and then monitor them all throughout their award life cycle, all the way through to closeout. So going back to that beginning stage, we're commonly colloquially known as almost like the gatekeepers, because our role within the federal government is to obligate funds and ensure and become basically stewards of said funds. So that's why, and that goes into what we do on a daily basis. That goes into why we're here today, basically to ensure that your questions are answered. We're here to help. We're not the OIG, we're not the audit team. Our role as financial stewards. So we basically obligate the money and then ensure that those monies are accounted for and your projects succeed. So that being said, if you have any sort of, we're here to answer questions from, technical questions to administrative questions. But as you can see in my little fancy graph here I've produced, the technical side of things, again, going full circle, really does fall under that kind of merit side. Your NSF program officers, reach out to them. I know, you're as PIs, congratulations on receiving your awards from NSF and the EPSCoR program. And we want to make sure you succeed. So as you go forward, any questions that arise, as the scenarios change, we know that here at the Foundation, both from the merit side of things and the financial administrative, we know things can change. But that being said, any questions you have from like the merit side, technical questions, make sure you reach out to your program officers, keep them in the loop of things. And then as administrative questions come up, that's why we're here today to talk to you all about that kind of award management, things to keep in mind in the back of your head as you move forward. The first thing I'll stress, again, congratulations, you're part of the NSF team, you're part of the EPSCoR team. We want to see you all succeed. If you're hearing this information again, I hope that it's helped you in the past. And if you're new to the program, this is why we're here today. Keep this stuff in mind. I'll have here the NSF PA PPG, Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. That's probably the #1 cornerstone document that you can be familiar with. There's links to it in this presentation. There's links to it at the end. If you Google NSF PA PPG, it's the first link. It's out there. If you take nothing away from my presentation today, please know that my biggest advice to everyone, these last 10 years I've been here, is to become familiar with this document. Save it to your computer, save it as a PDF. As situations arise, you can take buzzwords, you can take keywords from the situation, Control F, hit the search button, search the document, find some guidance. It may not be, I'll say it may not be the end all be all, it may not give you the answer, but it'll at least point you in the right direction. And you can take that kind of guidance and what you found and reach out to your administrative officers at your organizations, your universities, who are our kind of points of contact. Our life day to day as grants officers does revolve back and forth with them, because when we issue, like I said, when we review that proposal and we issue the award, we are issuing it to your organizations. So we're working with those SROs on a daily basis to make sure that the money's flowing where it needs to flow and the policies and procedures being followed. So again, in summary, grants officer, we review the proposals across the foundation, thousands of awards we monitor each year, and we want to make sure you succeed. So that being said, that goes in the form of questions, it goes in the form of outreach, and any technical questions, make sure you keep your program officers in the loop. They'll reach out to us, and then it kind of is, we're all one big family. We want to make sure everyone succeeds, but there's resources out there that can kind of best be tailored to help you do that. And that being said, speaking of questions, if you have any throughout our presentation, please hold them to the end, put them in the chat. We'll be sure to leave some time at the end to help, gather questions and go through them. That being said, we'll go forward. All right, so budget review. This is more of a budget overview. I know that everyone here has become either part of the EPSCoR program, or is looking to be part of it, or has submitted a proposal in the past, or has another one pending, something like that, or is actively in the middle of an NSF award. So this is really just, the idea here is things to keep in mind from taking a step back, thinking about it, give you some insight into what we look for, not only in the proposal review process, but also in that award management factors. So I have this phrase, clear and concise. I say this a lot. This again applies not only to proposal review, but also to award management, right? As that proposal comes through the system, it gets reviewed, it gets recommended for award, it comes down to us. One of the first things we're looking for is basically how the budget and budget justification is presented to us, right? It's what are you going to be working on? What are you going to be buying? Who's going to be hired, et cetera. We want to see a clear and concise summary of that within your justification. And then that also applies throughout the life of the award. We want to see, we don't want an essay anytime situation changes. We want to just see, okay, what's changing, how much is changing, from a monetary standpoint, who's changing, what role, et cetera. But keep it simple, keep it clear and concise. That again applies to proposal development and also award management as you go forward as a PI. If something changes, make a note of it, document it, keep it clear, keep it concise. That really applies heavily to our participant support and subrecipient categories. I know Rochelle is going to be speaking to this later. It is a primary focus of a lot of our reviews these, in the last few years, but really going back time immemorial. But in the last few years, we have a renewed focus on these elements, especially subrecipients. Make sure that anything that you're doing with your subs, your subrecipients, subawardees is, monitored. You're reaching out to those co-PIs. You're keeping abreast of what's going on. You're talking to your SROs. You're looping them in on any changes that need to take place, and to kind of double check things when it comes to subawardees as you move forward. Whether you're just starting out, I know there have been good time in regards to the Track 1 EPSCoR program in regards to this meeting. So if you're just starting out, you're just welcome to the team. These again things to keep in mind. Keep an eye on your participant support. Keep an eye on your subawardees. Take a look at your monitoring procedures. Just become familiar with them. I know that, like I said in our flow chart, you're in the principal investigator role. You're not part of that sponsor research kind of team, but it's good, again, I think, for everyone involved in a project and with NSF to be familiar with these concepts. So we're not asking you to take on that role as a sponsor research officer. I know every organization is different, but just become familiar with it, especially with these cost categories. Like I said, ensure you become familiar with their policies and procedures, how your organization monitors these subawardees, who's involved with what role, how the effort's being presented, how it's being a part of the project, whether you're working with a co-PI in this subaward, or a different organization, whether the organization. I know we've met with several different teams across the board with EPSCoR, and everyone has a different relationship with their subs. And I think it's important to just become familiar with that and keep those relationships alive and use them to bolster your project and keep it moving efficiently. Budget justifications are included with your subawardees. So this kind of touches back on that proposal review, which I know is not, depending on where everyone is, not necessarily the most accurate or relevant right now, Again, it's something to keep in mind because it's the first thing we look at when you have a question that comes to us or from that to our program officers. We ask for the award number and we'll go back and look at the budget. So even if you're thinking about a proposal in the future, or you have one right now, or you just started your award, having the budget justification be clear and concise, as I mentioned, is very important. It helps us answer questions as they come up. Keep in mind, this, again, grantee rebudgeting authority. This is key aspect here. I'll actually skip ahead. Prior approval requests. Grantee rebudgeting authority and prior approval requests. So again, if I keep this presentation very simple because I know everyone's at different places within their awards, and I like to think these are probably the cornerstone elements, right? The PAPPG, familiarity, I think that's important. And then grantee rebudgeting authority and prior approval requests, I think follow right under that. We know, as I said before, things change. We have in our policies and procedures with the foundation mechanisms that allow for that change. That's part of the beauty of NSF. That's part of why it's so wonderful, to have this support, because we allow for these kind of developments to happen because we know every project's different. And so, especially in the last couple of years, a lot of ins and outs, ebbs and flows, we know this. And grantee rebudgeting authority allows for things to continue to move forward efficiently. And so what does it mean? What does it mean? Well, basically within that PAPPG, there's an appendix at the end that focuses on what requires prior approval. Prior approval is basically if something changes that's at a drastic level, right? For example, personnel-wise, senior personnel, co-PI, or you yourself as the PI need to shift, right? A request needs to come into NSF. We need to make a change, a formal amendment, if it's a cooperative agreement, to the agreement. We'll review that. The program officer will review it. We'll review it as grants officers. We'll create a whole separate notification that goes into the file and has become part of the award records. Now, grantee rebudgeting authority exists for every other sort of change that happens throughout the project. So, for example, if a classic example is just materials and supplies. Right? If something has happened where you're not able to purchase as many, and I'm just making this up, as many laptops as you thought you needed, you need to cut the numbers down a little bit and reallocate it. You have the authority to do that. So I know that's a very simple example, but it sums it up. If something like that changes within these elements, cost elements, that's outside of the prior approval request matrix or elements, you're kind of allowed to do that. That's not to say it's a free-for-all. You're allowed to do it, but you need to document. And that goes back to my clear and concise language. Make a note of it, let your program officer know something's changed, but it doesn't necessarily require this full formal amendment situation. So I say this and I reiterate it, in a lot of outreach sessions and with, folks across the board, because I think it ties back to that we want to see you succeed and we want to see the project move forward successfully and efficiently. And when we have questions that come in where it falls under this rebudgeting authority and we're basically going through this circle of, oh yeah, yes, checks, we want to see the program officer say yes. Well, the program officer doesn't really need to say yes. They are aware of it. Something's changing in the project, but as long as it falls under this threshold, it can move forward accordingly. And so to have people be a part of this communication factor when they don't need to be, it can prevent delays. So keep in mind grantee rebudgeting authority as you move forward. Study the prior approval requests. Understand that kind of line where, okay, I can do this as a PI. This is something within my prerogative. It's according to this rebudgeting authority. And well, wait, maybe not. Let me go ahead and submit a prior approval request. Or that's being said, go ahead and what's the next? Ask early and ask often. Just because the grantee rebudgeting authority exists doesn't mean you're not allowed to ask about it. Please ask early, ask often. We're here to help. Going back again, we're as grants officers, we're here. Program officers are here. We want to see you succeed. Keep everything in mind. Keep your budgets clear and concise. Study the PAPPG and read your agreement. Those of you who just received your Track 1 awards, read your agreements. Read your award notifications. Look through them. Keep them on hand. Those, again, are one of the first things, key elements that as grants officers, we turn back to. If we have questions, we'll go, okay, what's the award number? Okay, let's take a look at the agreement. What what was in place at the time? What did we see back then? What did we approve? All right, they have subawards. Okay, interesting. All right, oh, this question has to do with subawards. All right, that's good to know. Everything flows. There's approval back at the time of award that is relevant to this question. Let's take it up from there. Again, become familiar with NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, PAPG. Understand that. Keep in mind that it is a cornerstone, not just for you all as PIs, but your SROs, your organizations. All of us here today are, view that as a cornerstone document. It basically tailors things to the NSF perspective down from the uniform guidance, which is the federal law governing all of this. And from that, your universities will take it or your organizations will take it and they'll create their own policies and procedures, which we also will reference. Again, remember prior approval requests and rebudgeting authority if and when things change. I say that because, like I mentioned earlier, we acknowledge that we know things can change. And so this prior approval is there for that reason. And then finally, I think out of everything I've mentioned, become familiar with the PAPG, read your award notification, read your agreement, become familiar with prior approval requests, and then finally, begin your prep for annual reports. In the last few years, there have been some changes to what I mentioned in the uniform guidance, where annual reporting has taken on a new light. We've basically shifted it to be in a different category where it has fallen into something that NSF really takes seriously. And not that it wasn't taken seriously before, but now there's significant consequences. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply, as I mentioned, some of you are just starting out. This takes up a new echelon of focus towards the end of projects. So the final project report and the project outcomes report, if those aren't submitted on time, things basically, we'll have to make a report to the FAPIS program, which I can go into more detail later. But the key thing for those of you starting out is just understand the time frames at play. The PAPG is recently updated to reflect the time frame, make it more clear and concise. Going off my point from earlier, make sure you're aware of that time frame. Make sure that you understand that these reports not only need to be reviewed and approved before they're successfully submitted. So give your program officers time to do that. We understand, trust me, that the science and the work needs to get done before the project report can be finished. We get that across the board, even down in the grants office, we understand that. But I mentioned it here as a bullet point, just to keep in mind as you move forward, or if you're in the middle of your project, just ensure that you have the building blocks for it in place so that it can be. Because as grants officers, we see this a lot where these aren't submitted on time. And to give you more insight, it pretty much stops things in their tracks. So if you're a PI or co-PI linked to a project within our systems, and you have an overdue report tied to that project, said project, it will block other actions that it may be even your own. So if you have an increment due, or from a funding perspective, we can't award it. We can't obligate those monies if an overdue report is in the system. So just understand it's, I know there's a lot of variables that go into it, and it's a larger topic for a larger discussion, but understand that it does tie into the greater NSF world, even if you don't think it does. So if you have co-PIs that are linked to your project and they're linked to another one and there's an overdue project report, the other projects will be blocked too. So I think that's the main point here, is that it's a larger piece of a larger puzzle when an overdue report is in our systems. And that being said, I wanted to focus on some key elements. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle Ray from our Division of Institution and Award Support. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Daniel. So good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to just give you guys an idea of where in the organizational chart we sit. As you can see, DGA is listed to the left of the Division of Institution and Award Support. So we are sister divisions. We work very closely together. And we are essentially, as Daniel said, sitting under the Budget, Finance, and Award Management Office, which is also known as the CFO's office. In the Division of Institution and Award Support, We have 4 offices that make up the division. The policy office, which many of you may know, Jean Feldman heads that office, and you've probably encountered her NSF updates at any of the NCURA or FDP sessions. We also have the systems office, which pretty much oversees and kind of manages the day-to-day runnings and goings on of our the awarding system that's used by DGA to issue funding to you all. So it's a very important office. And if you have, trouble with getting your project reports submitted, or, I think sometimes there are oftentimes where you would need to pull them back or correct them, project reports, the systems office can be pretty helpful in that. And then you come down to the 2 branches that are listed in yellow here, which are our oversight offices that kind of make up a branch, but we're separate teams. And you have the cost analysis and audit resolution, cost analysis and pre-award branch. And as the name indicates, this branch is headed by Sean Minnick, and him and his team perform cost analyses and financial analyses of various awards that are recommended, and this is all done pre-award. They will look at financial data in the budget and the types of costs you all have to determine whether or not they are allowable, and whether or not we need to get more information on them. So when Daniel was talking about the budget, yes, it is important to be clear about what you are requesting and why you are requesting it. And the concise part, the PAPPG now gives you all 5 pages to lay out your budget justification and kind of support why you need these costs. Daniel, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna request that they use those 5 pages because it's very, very important for the grants officers and for on the post award end, my office to know how you all or why you need those costs and how they're relevant and allocable and necessary for the projects that you're performing. The next branch is the resolution and advanced monitoring branch. And that is the branch that I head up. And in that branch, as the name indicates, we are responsible on behalf of NSF for conducting post-award oversight that looks like and comes in the form of single audits. So any of you that are receiving and expending $750,000 or more in federal expenditures, not just from NSF, but across all agencies. If it's $750,000 or more of expenditures from year to year, you should be subject to a single audit, which is required under the Uniform Guidance subpart 500. And we also resolve every single OIG audit that is performed of external awardees. And so, for example, recently the OIG did an audit of the EPSCoR program, and that was an internal audit of NSF, but as a part of their review of the NSF's ability and management of that program, they went out to some of the EPSCoR recipients who have awards and conducted audits at those institutions. And so we received those audit reports for those institutions, and we are now in the process of resolving those. And so in addition to those functions of resolution, we also conduct post-award oversight. We do that through work with a contractor, Atlas Research, who helps us doing our desk reviews, where we look at entities' general management structure to see if your entities are set up properly to manage and have separate segregation of duties, to make sure that things can flow well through your grant management process. In addition, we look at your accounting system to make sure that your accounting system is robust enough to handle the awards and the funding that you're receiving from NSF. And when we say adequate. If we look at some entities that are very small, and we may see that they use an Excel spreadsheet for their accounting system, that's not going to fly very well with us. So you need to make sure that you have an accounting system that can aggregate all the costs separately for each award and generate the necessary reports to help you track and make sure that you're expending funds in the way that you should be under the awards. And we also conduct site visits where prior to COVID, we would go on site based on a risk assessment that our office conducts every year to determine which awards are rising to the top as the riskiest awards for NSF at that time. And we conduct this risk assessment as early as March to feed into the next fiscal year's site visits. And so what we do is we put in different types of filters and things such as, the type of award, certainly the money amount is important. We also look at the type of entity that is managing the award. Do they have more risk than other entities, things like that. And we come out with a list of about 30 entities where we decide to conduct on-site visits. During COVID, we've been doing those virtually, but we do hope to be able to get back out on site next year once NSF has raised the travel restriction for staff. We do a host of other post-award monitoring activities, including things like post-award adjustments. So if your award has expired and you have not drawn down all of the money before the financial close and you are due a reimbursement for some costs that you either overlooked or just got a late subaward invoice, you will submit that through ACMS, and depending on the dollar amount, my office will also look at those to make sure that the costs that are being requested after the financial close of the award are reasonable, allocable, and allowable. Next slide, Daniel. All right, so we've talked about DIAS as a whole. We will focus on the resolution and advanced monitoring branch, just because that's what I do, and I really want to share, as Daniel mentioned to you all, I really want to share with you all some tips and just some information about what we do and how you can kind of make sure that you are in a good place as it relates to when you get that audit engagement letter from the OIG, or you're prepared for your single audit as it relates to NSF awards. Next slide. So I would say that most, and if not all, NSF awards in my eyes are always very scientifically and technically successful. We see great research coming out of things. We know that the EPSCoR program is doing a great job at making sure that they're reaching down to entities who are not always involved in these types of projects, and really just doing a great job at working with and spreading the science and technology, right? But in addition to being successful scientifically and technically, we have to have you guys be successful financially and administratively, right? And so what we're trying to do is want to make sure that you guys have a few keys to success on how to go about making sure that you are successful in both ways under your EPSCoR awards. And we are federal servants, public servants. We are here to always, as Daniel said, answer your questions. If you're a PI and you have questions, and you can go through your SRO to ask those questions, and they can come to us. We're happy to take those questions. But quite frankly, if a PI has a question about an allowable cost and picks up the phone and calls NSF or DGA or my office, we should be able to take that phone call and answer that call for them. But just make sure that you're asking questions to ensure that you're not getting into any trouble that you don't intend to get into. So the first way that you can make sure that you are ensuring that you are in a good place and prepared for any audits or site visits or anything that NSF conducts for you, is writing down your policies and procedures. That is number one. It is the foundational basis of the uniform guidance. It is focused on internal controls. And I will tell you that the OIG at NSF is also focused on internal controls. And I'll tell you how I can tell that when I get to the next slide. But just make sure you're writing down your policies and procedures. You want your staff at the university, current and future, to be consistent in how you're applying your policies and procedures. So if you can talk to us on a site visit, for example, about how you perform your monthly reviews of expenditures, but you don't have it in written form, how does the next individual who takes the position that's responsible for that know how to perform that review? So putting things in writing and making sure that they're updated periodically, or at least reviewed periodically, to make sure you're keeping up with changes to the PAPPG or changes to the terms and conditions of the award. It is very important to make sure that you do those things and have them in writing so that you can refer to them and the staff can refer to them and everybody's working on the same page. So next up is adhering to policies and procedures. So once you write down those policies and procedures and have them established, and the team, the staff is all working on them all together, that is great. Just make sure everybody's following them, consistently. A lot of times in audits, what we see is not necessarily systemic issues where organizations are not following their policies and procedures. We just see a one-off where maybe one person in one department, failed to follow this policy and procedure. The reason it's also important for you to follow those policies and procedures that you've now written down is because although they're supposed to align with the uniform guidance and they are in the terms and conditions of the award, there are instances when we do site visits and things like that where we see where some universities or some awardees, their policies and procedures go a further step and they're more restrictive for whatever reason they've decided is necessary. And that's fine. The problem is if the IG comes out and sees that your policy is more restrictive than the uniform guidance and you're not following it, they're going to question costs and they're going to have a finding, internal control finding for you. So make sure that your staff is adhering to those policies and procedures. In addition, documenting. So not documenting, you've already documented your policies and procedures. Now we're talking about expenditures. When your entity is charging costs to NSF awards, it is very important to ensure that there is documentation to support those expenditures that are charged to the awards. When they are not, the auditors are absolutely positively going to question those costs, and they call them unsupported costs. One question recently came up for a university that we did a site visit for regarding participant support costs, for example. Why do we have to document the stipends that we give to the participants? It's not written anywhere. Where is that written that we have to do that? Well, what I fall back to is 2 CFR 302B2, where it says recipients have to provide full and complete support of all federal funding that they're expending. So you have to make sure that there's a piece of paper that shows us that the stipend was given to the eligible student or eligible participant versus, say, an employee of the university of your entity, because stipends and participant support costs are for participants only that are participating in training. So just keep that in mind. It's better to document it and not need it than to need it and not have documented it. So, and then finally, for this slide, asking questions, especially when strange things or unusual circumstances come up. If your PI is stuck or if you're stuck, on something that they want to do, please take time to either, it's fine to look at uniform guidance. We certainly encourage that. But if you can't figure it out, don't wing it. Pick up the phone and call or email DGA, your grants officer, or my office so that we can help you before you make an unintended mistake and end up with an audit finding down the road. And then prior approvals. This is something that is becoming very prevalent, especially as it relates to subawards. And so Daniel reminded you, and I'm going to remind you as well, and I'm going to talk about it in the next slide specific to a couple of areas. Please make sure that any prior approvals that are required, if it's a prior approval, I promise you it's in the terms and conditions of the award, and a term and condition is something that you have to follow. And so you don't get to just, follow what you want to do or kind of push off those things that are inconvenient or burdensome. If it's a term and condition of the award, we really do need you all to follow those terms and conditions of the award. Next slide. So moving right into that, subawards and subrecipient assessments. These are, I've highlighted here on this slide, the most frequent audit findings that we are seeing and resolving right now as we speak. And subawards and subrecipient assessment and monitoring are at the top of the list. What the auditors are finding, and they started finding it, I think, in 2017, is in situations where a new subaward is added after the award has been made and issued with other subawards, recipients are failing to come back or forgetting or overlooking coming back to NSF and getting that prior approval for that new subaward. And that is presenting quite a conundrum for us under audit resolution. So an example is, I think it was a 2019 audit, Arizona State University, and audit reports are posted on the OIG's page, and then on our page, the management decisions that were made are also posted. But Arizona State University had a PI and a co-PI on award, and the PI left Arizona State to go to another institution, and he accepted the job, went to the new institution, and soon a supplement request from the new institution was put through for a supplement, and was put through DGA and was processed. Well, when we got the problem in audit, audit resolution, what we found was everybody knew about this PI moving to another institution, except for there was no grants officer amendment, which is required. So the program officer knew about it, and a lot of times the program officers will know about it because your PIs are talking to each other, talking to the program officers to, let them know what's going on and just kind of have technical discussions. If in that technical discussion with your program officer, you are letting them know that the PI or the co-PI is moving to another institution, but intends to continue working on that project, there has to be a subaward put in place, which requires a prior approval through the notifications and request in research.gov. Participant support cost. This is, as I said earlier, one where changes are often made to terms and conditions, to the PAPPG. And I think just in general, as technology has advanced and we've gotten things like iPads and iPhones and just different types of technical tools, we often get a lot of participant support costs under audits that are questioned, where the costs are questioned. It can range from anywhere to gifts and incentives and things like that. So With that, what I would remind you of is there are 4 in the definition of participant support costs in the uniform guidance. It is stipends, subsistence, travel, or fees such as registration or conference fees paid on behalf of the participant. If it doesn't fall in one of those 4 categories and it's t-shirts and it wasn't included in your original budget, so say it's t-shirts or a book bag so that conference attendees or participants could carry their, all the stuff that they need to carry from session to session. If it's a post-award decision to purchase these things that are outside of the definition, please understand that you have to come into NSF to get prior approval for those things that fall outside of the definition. And also a reminder that no indirect costs can be allocated to participant support costs. If you are holding a function at a hotel with conference rooms, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be entering into a contract, a service contract with that entity, with that hotel or venue. Those would then have indirect costs allocated to them, but they should not be charged under participant support costs. They should be charged under G6 other. And in your budgets, in your proposal budgets, it should be very clear that you intend to do that. If it's something that is a cost after the fact, after the award has already been made, that's fine, because like Daniel said, you have rebudgeting authority. However, just make sure that you are documenting that, you're changing the venue and you're going to enter into this contract for, to hold the conference. The next item, allowability and allocation of costs, is also a very huge one. I would say these top 3 bullets are in every single audit finding that we have right now. We have about 26 open audits from the OIG. Just a reminder to you all that from 2 CFR 220, Appendix A to the uniform guidance, there was was unnoticed by me and my team. The IG brought it to our attention and we had a discussion about it. And in the prior cost principles under the allocable cost section, it previously said, if a cost benefits 2 or more projects in proportions that cannot be determined, you can allocate it based on any reasonable methodology. Now what it says is the methodology has to be both reasonable and documented. And so what I suggest behind that is, if you do not have an allocation methodology for costs under federal awards, I recommend that your organization sit down and figure out how you guys are going to allocate costs and draft that up in written policy and procedures and get it finalized and put it in place. The IG is looking for that when they go out and find things that are allocated between multiple awards. Right now, there is a finding related to publications and allocation of publications. If you all have come across that issue with the OIG, we are looking into that now with them and working with them to make sure that they understand that when a PI acknowledges an award in a publication as somehow contributing in a scientific and technical way to the project, that doesn't necessarily mean that funds were supported from that award to this award that they're looking at. So, but other than that, please get an allocation policy and procedure in place and adhere to it. Application of indirect costs. This was a finding under several audit reports in 2020 and 2021. I think things are calming down on this particular finding because we've helped the IG understand that when you all submit a proposal budget, that if the rate that you proposed was, say, 48%, and in the time that between when you submitted the proposal and the award was issued, you received a new negotiated rate and that new rate is 50%, it is acceptable for you all to use that 48%, especially if you're an IHE, an institution of higher education. So I have here, just for reference, if you're an IHE, you refer to 2 CFR 200 Appendix 2. If you're a nonprofit, you should be adhering to Appendix 3 in that same document. Purchases near or after the period of performance. Certainly after the period of performance is just unallowable. If we are looking at an audit report finding and it says you purchased things after the award period and we look at the documentation and it supports that, we're just disallowing it. There's no discussion needed. But near or after is one of those gray areas that we get into a lot. And so what we have to do there is we look very carefully at what the purpose of the award is and to figure out whether or not that item that was purchased was necessary and allocable. I will tell you that one area that is a no-no is when you purchase things like basic supplies that should be kept in a stock room, that should have an inventory in stock. If you're restocking something where you took something from the inventory at your organization and you used it on the NSF award, and now at the end of the award you want to take that money and restock it, you can't charge the agency for the price that you paid to restock it. You have to charge us at the price that was paid to stock it originally, the price that it cost when it was put into inventory originally. And then unsupported costs, as I mentioned earlier, and here's just the 2 CFR reference for that. Just make sure that when you are charging things to the award that you are absolutely documenting. Again, more is better than not enough. Next slide. And we're at Q&A. So any questions? I don't know if there's any in the chat.
So we have about 10 minutes left for questions. There have not been any entered into the chat to date or the Q&A. Folks in the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window to enter questions in for the panel.
I'll go ahead and cut to, as we wait for questions, I'll go ahead and jump to that resource slide.
Good idea.
So people can get an idea of what's in here. We have a link to the cooperative agreement definition. We talk about the prior approval matrix we both referenced earlier. We have links to our respective divisions, DIAS tools and resources, and then some of the, what I believe Rochelle mentioned, these finalized NSF management decisions.
Yes.
So let's speak to that.
Yes.
And let's see, previous. There's our context information.
Yeah, so I definitely, our team is happy to take calls from anyone. We'd rather deal with these issues up front and not see them in an audit report if we can help you stay from there. Let's see. I just saw something pop into the.
Yes, I can answer the first one. Presentations, all the presentations that we have received for this meeting will be available approximately 2 weeks post-event on the meeting website. When those materials become available, all registered parties will receive an email.
And I can take the last one, or the second one. Can you talk some more about moving funds out of participant support costs? Absolutely. So under 2 CFR 200, where the definitions are, the uniform guidance defines clearly that participant support costs consist of stipends, subsistence, and allowance. So if you're having a 8-week program on campus, and you're going to provide them housing and a meal ticket or something, and then travel for them, or fees like conference fees. Once you get outside of that, and I'll give you some examples that we saw under the EPSCoR audits. A lot of times what we see is t-shirts. If you guys are working with smaller schools, sometimes it's elementary schools, or maybe it's a high school or middle school, and maybe you're taking them to a, let's just say, an amusement park. We've seen this in the past. You're taking them to an amusement park to focus on, you know, physics of roller coasters or something like that. I'm making this up. But it has, you know, the purpose for those t-shirts. What we've seen in the past is we want to keep the kids, we want to be able to quickly identify the kids. It's a safety issue. We want to be able to identify our kids from that school, and that's perfectly acceptable. However, if you didn't request it in the original proposal and use those 5 pages to say, you know, we're going to need these t-shirts, or maybe you didn't know you were going to need the t-shirts. Maybe it was an event that came up after the fact. You need to come into NSF and request approval to buy those t-shirts and charge them to the award, because they fall in that other category under participant support cost under the budget, right? And so it's costs like that. If you're wanting to give some type of incentive or some type of awards, or you know, I'm just trying to think of things I've seen in the past. Again, the tote bags for the conferences is very popular, and it may make a lot of sense. If you're going to have them at a conference where they're going to be collecting, you know, lots of papers and you know, maybe working on different types of projects, and they don't want them walking around a conference holding them in their arms. It makes sense for them to have a bag to put those things in so they can carry them and keep them. And so it's just, if it's post award and you didn't request it in the original budget, just make sure you come in for prior approval before purchasing that.
I see the first one. If an investigator has a role change within their institution which prevents them from receiving salary and benefits from a grant, can those funds be reallocated to other areas such as supplies and/or student wages? So this falls under, it looks like maybe a little bit in terms of prior approval, in terms of co-PI, PI change, senior personnel changes that might need to be submitted. And then it also does fall under the grantee rebudgeting authority a little bit. It depends. I mean, I'll take a step back and answer this from a more general perspective. To that point, I think within senior personnel, within salaries and wages, there is elements of grantee rebudgeting authority that are present. So if you have changes in salaries and things of that nature, like let's say, you know, students or graduate students that might not be, you need to make changes there, you can maneuver those funds into materials and supplies, for example. Now, whether or not, you know, you use that phrase in, you know, the term investigator, PI, that does fall under, you know, a prior approval mechanism, right? You would have to make a change there. It had come in for formal amendment to change that before you can move the funds around. I hope that helps. I mean, I took a step back from the question without getting too specific.
Right. I would just add to that, Daniel, that if there's a reduction in the PI's role and in their salaries, that could be indicative that there's a reduction in the effort that's being provided, which is something that requires prior approval, if it's significant. And it could be a scope or objective change. So definitely something you want to talk to your program officer about, and maybe get in writing, you know, whether or not this is considered a scope change or effort that needs to be approved.
Oh yeah. And then I see there's one here.
Yeah, I didn't answer Andrea's question. I'm sorry, Andrea. Yes. program officer, POs should not POs, PI should not be moving costs out of participant support costs. When funds are in participant support costs, it is a term and condition of the award that they must get prior approval. I believe it is from the program officer. Daniel can correct me if I'm wrong, but it has to be approved. If the auditors come out and see that, they absolutely will question the cost.
Mhm.
And it
I
may
think
be,
there is actually a mechanism in place that it does require not just programmatic approval, but it comes through us too.
okay,
It's like in research.gov, I think it is participant support other or something like that, other change, where I can't off the top of my head, I can't remember what the specifics are, but I have seen that request and we've approved it.
right. I do know that it's at least at the, so if they already have like stipends, for example, budgeted, and they're not going to get as many participants as they thought, and they want to take those funds and maybe, I don't know, take them on a bus trip to a museum and move those funds to G6 other, then
Right.
yes, they would definitely need prior approval for that.
Right.
And would need to document everything, both with NSF and on their end.
Right.
Does that help? I hope that helps, Andrea.
I see. This goes back. Do you see that indirect cost question, Rochelle?
I do. What happens if the indirect cost in the proposal actually goes down by the time of the award? Can we apply what was in the proposal? If the rate goes down by the time of the award, you must reduce the rate to that lower rate, because what happens is if you charge the rate that was higher, that was in the proposal, you will, if your system doesn't automatically switch you to the correct rate, you will be overcharging indirect costs at that point, and that is unallowable.